Hello, everyone. So, well, thank you, Charlotte, for the introduction. Myself, I'm Carmen, and I deal with SEO for TAG, and we do lots of SEO and content for both English and international sites, all e-commerce, of course, just as Charlotte said. And Ceci is one of the brilliant copywriters in my team. And as you probably have seen in the last years, we've been encountering quite a lot of Google algorithms, and our content was reacting differently depending on the different countries. So we decided to investigate a little bit more about NLPs and what Google algorithms are made of. So NLP is actually one of the key elements that a process understands, categorizes, and rank your content. So that's why we wanted to look into it a bit deeper. So next slide. I'm going to actually let Ceci start with it because we're going to go through the theory and then a bit more of information.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. My name is Cecilia, and we started really researching this a couple months back when we saw in the Google AI blog something posted on semantic research. The question was, is the future of Google search purely semantic? And we started wondering, could that affect and impact content because suddenly we're looking very closely at artificial intelligence by way of the way we structure human languages. And yeah, today basically we're going to walk you through the breakdown of how semantic analysis works and artificial intelligence, very, very briefly. And then we're going to walk you through the natural language processors that have been constantly being updated by Google. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with this wonderful quote that I read recently. It's, when it comes to our sense of belonging, natural language, or language is the natural place to start. And I think that semantics really tries to bridge our understanding of ourselves and the world around us by way of language. And of course, this builds understanding of each other. It builds community. Language is the most instinctive thing we have. And I think that will be cool to kind of see how this idea transports and goes through, it translates into the natural language processors. So next slide, please. A little bit of historical background here with semantics. So we're looking at human languages and the way these are structured. Even if we speak different languages, we have these principles that we subscribe to that helps us make sense of the world around us. So we have Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist, to thank for when he distinguished and make the distinction between parole versus slang, sentence and utterance. What this means is parole is our individual use of the language that we abide to. This is irrespective of language. It can be any that you speak. And then pragmatism is the way we contextualize based on these structures. So say, I ask you, can I borrow your pen? You know that I'm not asking if you're actually, I know that you're not asking if you can actually do this. It's more a polite request. So pragmatism comes from understanding these structures in language and applying them logically. So yeah, semantics is just also, next slide, please, how we categorize things around us. And I'll talk about the examples I've provided here in a second, but the main theories of meaning I'm focusing on today are ideation, referential, and possible world. And this all explains the way content is written because it needs to be contextualized constantly. Theories of meaning basically is relative to truth value. What this means is we always have to work in language within a binary of truth versus falsity. Without this, we can't really make sense of the world, right? Because we have to follow these logical structures wherein if I read a certain term or word, I know that within a structure it means different things. But this also depends on truth. It's kind of why Google's new updates depend so much on accuracy and actual, oh goodness, I've forgotten the word. But information just has to be accurate and reliable. So yeah, prototypes fall between this truth value wherein we can put certain references of words into categories. That's the first example. We all know that an apple is an apple. That's very clear and straightforward, kind of a boring idea. But if we insert fruit in there, suddenly the meaning changes. But these both can, even though they're kind of synonymous and they mean the same thing, not really. And fruit is an example of a prototype. And this is important later on when we explain like natural language processing. And a way that these machines also understand human languages is through universal and existential quantifiers. So instead of saying an apple, we would say all apples are fruit. The quantifier there is an versus all. And a machine needs to be able to distinguish that because it could get confused as to what category to place one or all. And the second example that I provide here of George Washington was the first president of the United States. This is also based on a priori knowledge. So that logic of course an apple is an apple, and of course George Washington was the first president of the United States. We're working on the basis here that we already know that this name stands for exactly what it is. But when you do possible world semantics, suddenly we add George Washington was married to Martha Washington. If we change those two sentences constantly, so say Martha Washington was married to the first president of the United States, all these signifiers mean the same thing, but when you put them in a sentence like that, it's based on an inference. You have to make sure you can constantly remember that President of the United States, the first one means George Washington and that he was married to Martha. And the last example I provide is grass is green. Now, based on ideation semantics, we can all kind of assume that we understand that grass is green. And this is based, yes, on assumption. But then we have to look closely at that. What does it mean that grass is green? Could it be that it's summertime, it's springtime? Or are we referring to an idiom, because grass is greener on the other side? These always have different sides to them. By this I mean words. And attaching meaning to them can be tricky. And of course, it's all about context. And sentence structures are there to always remind us that every word, when placed differently, can mean something new. Next slide, please. So yeah, I wanted to break down semantic analysis the way a human would do it, because this later would explain natural language processors, which are the systems of artificial intelligence you'll find in Google updates. Lexical means lexeme. So lexeme is another word for word. Sorry to be so repetitive. But yeah, so in a sentence, say, to use the same example, an apple is a fruit, there are several lexemes there already, so apple and fruit. That's the first step of the reading. The next one is grammatical. How do we correlate those terms? How could they become relevant to one another in a sentence structure? And then you move to the third step, which is syntactic. They look at the whole structure. Now we know that when we read the sentence, an apple is a fruit, of course, now we can tie those together. They're not standing just by themselves. And that's where the last step comes in, which is the semantic. When we are able to contextualize fully by way of a sentence, we can understand the meaning of words. And natural language processors, i.e. the machines we use in our search results, or the machines that are used in Google, they need to be able to not just go in one direction and read just words and place random meaning on them. They have to look at it as a collective. And next slide, please. So yes, essentially, what you're looking at here, figure 1, this is the neural network or the brain of the system or framework wherein Google understands human languages. It is very similar to the way we just explained, that it breaks down step by step what every word could mean, and then from its database or its brain, it pulls out potential meanings of that sentence we're putting in. So if I were to insert an apple is an apple into Google, what this system does is break that down and be like, okay, well, that's meaningless, because we all know an apple is an apple. But then it tries to change and say, okay, well, let's categorize the last bit and the last word into fruit, so it's easier to pull up a more relevant search. And this is trained by using countless information that it's pulled out from Wikipedia. It's pulled out so many different corpuses of text, so it can understand us at a human level and provide answers that are useful to us, because we're able to understand them in our own terms. And I'm gonna hand it over to Carmen now, so she can explain a bit more what the NLP does.
To compare it into a more of a real way of how language is split, when you are as a human are processing a sentence, you go through all these simple steps. The database is all the experience that you had in your life, all the knowledge, all the books that you read. The output transformation is the process of how you categorize a content and understand it. And the output data is really the conclusion that you're making of whatever experience you're reading. This is exactly the same way that Google process it. And when I say Google, I mean natural language processors. So actually it is called neurological language model, which is following the same way that the brain works. So in this case, the database is taken from all the text that the language model has used. So that's what we call corpus or corpora in plural, comes from Latin. And then the output transformation is the language model, which Google has several, so probably you have heard of BERT. T5 is the new one, and we're going to be talking about this more specifically, which process the sentences, and then the output data, which depending on what language model is processing it, will have different outputs. Next slide, please. So we're going to be talking particularly about BERT, because whoever works SEO knows a lot about BERT. But BERT is a groundbreaking way of understanding language. Up to now, any natural language processes or NLPs have always been one direction, meaning you have the sentence and you were understanding each single word in their own way. What Transformer did, that Google created with this framework, is able to understand every single word depending on what words are being surrounded by it. So in the example of, an example that I really like to say is, I arrived to the bank after crossing the river. So before Transformers, Google will be confused, or any NLP will be confused about what bank means. Does it mean part of the river? Does it mean a financial institution? After Transformer being created, it was able to go one by one, hide or mask that word, so the machine could learn the word that should go there. And by learning the word, it was able to understand the context. So after this, the NLP, BERT, is able to allocate a label. So if we think about this sentence, it's able to allocate the label of geography, of trips, travel, and that's what Ceci was talking about earlier, and that's why it's important to understand the theory, because it's a prototype. And actually, if you put it in practical terms, if any of you have ever done any content SEO and you have created content clusters, that's how Google was able to identify that your blog post was talking about, let's say, lipsticks, because it was able to allocate a label. Next slide, please. The problem when BERT was created, it was created on Wikipedia, so all the content that is in English Wikipedia, plus Yahoo and questions and answers. And that's what Google did, the NLP was translating this English content into a sort of a middle language that was neutral, and then translated it into lots of other languages. The problem that we found here is that while in English it was quite accurate, so we can see this is a sort of way of calculating how good your language is, right? And 89.9 is human level, anything below is a machine. So Google is able to identify. So you can see that BERT is actually in English 81.4, which is actually quite close to humans. But when you start checking all the languages, you can see that it starts going down depending on the complexity and the diversity of the language, which, I mean, for whoever is doing international SEO, is a problem because it means that your content is not properly understood by Google. Google cleverly made this BERT open source so everyone could investigate. So lots of all the universities around the world started using this open source BERT and created their own BERTs based on their corpus, based on corpus on the languages. So that's how we have Camembert, which is French. We have Alberto, which is Italian, and many other BERTs. And all this information was then given back to Google. So Google was able to increase with time the understanding of different languages and fine-tuning the algorithm or the model, making it cleverer and cleverer. Also Facebook, because it was open source, and of course Facebook works online, creating their own investigation and continuing improving BERTs. Next slide, please. And that's how we get to MAM. Who hasn't heard about MAM? I mean, maybe you haven't, but it came out last year, and since then, the SERPs in Google have changed drastically. I mean, it hasn't been from one day to another, but whoever pays attention to it, you could see the difference, and you see as we go through it. So mom is 1,000 times more powerful than BERT. Why? Because while BERT have 2 gigabytes of information in English, BERT, mom, which is based in T5, so mom will be the language model, T5, the framework, is based in 4 terabytes. Way more information than BERT. It has way more of a database in the background that can analyze. But also, MAM, which means multitask Unicode model, is able to also process images. It's not just words. It's just not text. It can process images. It can process videos. It can process most of the multimedia things that you have on Google. Also, is based on, this is Google model users informed queries, which means it gets all the information that you guys have been putting in Google since you started using Google. Anything that you put in Gmail, anything that you have searched for, anything that you have been looking into your devices becomes your context. So we've been talking about Google understanding context in sentences, Google understanding context in words and text. Now Google understands your context as well, which is cool. Freaky, but cool. Next slides, please. So I like to, sorry about the slide actually, I can see that the picture is covering the text, but an example that I like to show on how this works, so how the understanding of language and your context applies to SEO, is that wherever you search for, it's going to have a different SERP than wherever Ceci search for. So for example, if I prefer long reading because I'm that kind of person. I spend lots of time reading blog posts. So Google is going to be giving me blog posts. But Ceci, she likes cooking and she likes putting videos in the background while she's cooking and she prefers to watch videos. So Google is going to offer her videos instead of offering her long-form content. And using the same example that Google used in the paper when they launched MOM, the example of Mount Fuji. So, if Ceci is visiting Japan, she's traveling from the UK to well, actually, from Mount Fuji is in Japan, right? Yeah. Oh, jeez. Right. For a second, I got confused. Sorry. So, if you traveling to Mount Fuji to Japan, Google is able to identify that you are an English person going to Japan and you're searching Mount Fuji. So, the information that it's going to give you is how to get there, how expensive it's going to be if you have to go up, how long it's going to take you to see the whole things, and the main things that you have to see. But now imagine that myself, I'm very much into climbing, not very likely, but imagine, I'm very much into climbing, and I've been climbing lots of different mountains around the world, and Google knows that I've been searching for this information. It's going to be giving me more information about the gears I need to buy, how expensive it is, how difficult it is to climb the mountain, and giving me health tips on how to do it. So this is how T5 works in terms of your context, but it also can do loads of other different things. So T5 is able to get a sentence and give you another sentence. So it's no longer a sentence plus label as BERT, but sentence plus translation into German, sentence plus a summary of your sentence. So it's able to summarize in how many words you want. So if you have a paragraph of 200, you want 3 words to have a summarize, it's going to be able to do it. It's able to score your text in the quality of your grammar and the usage of your language. So if your text is quite simple, it's going to be able to say it's a 2. And it's also able to analyze those all the text and being able to connect it to other texts out there. So why is this important in SEO? For whoever does SEO has always been thinking about the quality of content and putting lots of keywords. But really, if Google is able to understand synonyms, is able to understand sentiments, is able to score your content, how much keywords are important when actually Google is able to do everything for you? So before I move on into the more detailed consequences of all these updates. I really recommend for whoever is interested in this topic to go to see this video from SEMrush. So we have done a very quick summary in here, but in this video in SEMrush, there is the proper theory behind and all the paper that Google released. So next slide, please. This also came out like 2 weeks ago, and I was just talking about how Google can read images. Google can also create images, so Google transformers. So if you tell this transformer called Imagine, we've been trying to figure out what the name is, because I will call it Imagen in Spanish, but we're pretty sure it's not the name. But anyway, so if you tell Imagine, a majestic oil painting of a raccoon queen wearing red French royal gown, is going to be able to create an image for you, which is pretty scary, actually, to be honest. In fact, they did this in open source because they thought it was really dangerous for people to use it for things that they shouldn't be used. But it tells you how advanced it is in terms of understanding your image. Implications that this have for SEO: you really need to start putting alt text in your images, please, because otherwise Google is not going to be able to understand anything. Next. This is how it works. So I said Google is able to get the image, convert it into text, is able to get the text, convert it into image, and that's will kind of decided to who to serve this image. So for example, if lipsticks, if what Ceci is looking for a lipstick that goes well with the red dress, Google will know that that's what Ceci is looking for, an image that she needs to use to compare. And that is very important. I think someone in here today is talking about reality and technology and etc. in the booths. Having anything like 3D technology, if you are an e-commerce size, anything wearing dress, clothes, selling clothes, makeup, lots of things that we do, particularly in THG, this is going to be very key technology for the future if you are doing e-commerce. So next slide, please. So really, I've already been saying, what does it mean for SEO? It has lots of implications for SEO, and it's not something that is going to change from one day to another, but to be frank, it's going faster than I thought. So in terms of the SERPs are going to be unique for you. So there is no longer I'm ranking #1 for this keyword. Why? Because there is no #1. Each of you have a different #1. So it's going to be more difficult to track keywords and the rankings of keywords. But it actually is good for you. First of all, it's good if you are an agency and you have clients that are constantly asking about keywords and the rankings. But also, it's going to be better for you to be able to focus on the quality of the content, because content is going to be what moves the needle rather than stuffing your content with lots of keywords. It's very important as well. You consider the messy middle. So the reason why I think Google wanted to do this is because the user journey is no longer linear, and actually Google just went through it. It's more of confusing. You go through so many different steps through the user journey as people do this user journey. So it's important that you identify the content, the context of your future users, and what's the intent behind each of your pages. So talking about lipstick in this case, you need to make sure that you cover lipstick from every single point of view. You need to make sure that your page content is top-notch and it has the right images and it has all the new technology. And your category content needs to have all the specific details about what is sold in that category. I just covered the keywords, so it's important to make sure that you cover also all the multimedia types, because we saw video, images, anything like that is going to be key to make you stand out. It has been key for a few years for whoever has been working in SEO for a few years, but it's certainly becoming more and more important. And connect your contents, really. I mean, we're talking about context. We're talking about the contents of you, the context of your sentences. You also need to contextualize, that's a word, yeah? The content that you have in your website. So what's the point of talking about lipstick in your blog, talking about lipsticks in your category page, talking about your lipsticks in your product page, and not creating a connection? I'm on all of that because yes, Google is clever, but the more you feed Google with easy ways of understanding your content, the easier you're going to be ranking for that content. And yeah, this is most of it in terms of the theory behind it, but we wanted to prove it. We wanted to prove that to be frank, I wanted to prove that I was right. I love that. But yeah, it seems to have worked. And we created different case studies. Next slides, please. So I was talking about the connections of the different type of content. We did this from the e-commerce point of view. So we made sure that every single possible topic was covered in every single part of our websites, and we connected it with internal linking. Ceci, who is fantastic in terms of obviously understanding the user, understanding semantics, and etc., she decided what type of content and what intent and tone of voice will be put in each of them, and then using basic stuff in internal linking, we connected. And we saw an immediate effect. And to be frank, this slide is all, because a couple of weeks ago, there was a Google update, and the rankings just rocketed. I mean, of course, touching wood, it doesn't go down. You never know. But it's looking quite good. We didn't only see rankings going for long-term keywords, like, I don't know, red velvet lipstick, but we saw it going up for every keyword related to lipsticks, even if we haven't touched the content in, for example, the main page. Next slide, please. How did we do it? We didn't care about keywords so much. We actually care about topics. We care about the user, and we care about the connection. So we identify all the single points that we needed to talk about, in this case, makeup. In case you don't know, makeup is a lot of content. And we created those connections in a way that every single line is an actual link, and every single line is a potential topic. Because there's going to be so many of you writing and asking Google things, we need to write everything that we can. We need to be able to create content for all of you. Obviously, there is so much that you can search about lipsticks. We're not going to be talking about lipsticks in, I don't know, Mars, but we need to cover as much as possible. Next slide, please. So this is how it actually affected. This is another cluster. So we did all of that for the whole of the website, but then we also look individually into the blog, and we did it for the German market. And we wanted to prove actually that Google didn't understand the content for German as much as he understood English. So we created good content for some pages, keyword stuff content for all the pages. And actually, in the case of Bird, which was before T5, T5 is only running recently, 1 year or so, these pages were working better for Bird after T5, and particularly after 2 weeks ago in the updates. The ones with good content, well written, without keyword stuffing, are working better. Next slide, I think that's it really, yeah. So that's our talk. We are super passionate about this topic, so if in the break anyone wants to approach us and ask any questions, please let us know.
Please ask questions. Yeah. I think we're all we both are very keen to discuss this a bit further with whoever's interested. And just also as a closing statement, as we discussed our case studies, maybe I rushed through the theory a bit more, but I think moving forward with content, what we want is really a human touch. And Google can really pick up on that now with everything that's been changing. And yeah, use your intuition to all who are content writers. And if you look at a page, if it's a brand or list page, really pay attention to that. Look at the products, look at it holistically and collectively. Don't think of it as like separate entities, because Google's no longer thinking unidirectionally. It really, really does value prototypes. It wants to know how we categorize in real time. It tries to imitate us and mimic us. So I think content moving forward should never lose that human touch, because we don't want to read stuff that feels automated and lifeless. We want to add that touch, because even as these were developed years ago, there were teams of linguists looking at it. So yeah, I just want to leave you with that, and hopefully you enjoyed or learned something, and come to us with questions, really. Thank you very much.